My boyfriend pushed me to meet his parents at dinner. He badmouthed me in Spanish, assuming I was clueless. My name is Ava Larson, and I am a graphic designer from Chicago. For 2 years, I was in love with Jared Morales, a car salesman from Miami. He insisted I meet his parents over a family dinner at their home in Coral Gables, Florida, saying it was the next big step for us. I was nervous, but went along with it, hoping to make him happy. What I did not know was that the dinner would turn into a nightmare. Jared spent the entire evening speaking Spanish with his parents, tearing me down, my job, my personality, our future, thinking I could not understand a word. He even laughed and called me clueless while I sat there, smiling politely. I understood everything. You see, my father was from Cádiz, Spain, and Spanish was the language of my childhood. At the end of the night, I spoke to his parents in perfect Spanish, thanked them for their hospitality, and exposed every lie Jared had told. Then I walked away from him for good. That dinner changed everything, and though it hurt, it set me free. Jared and I had been together for 2 years when he started pushing hard for me to meet his parents. It began about 6 months ago, right around the time we started talking more seriously about our future. Jared works as a car salesman at a dealership in Miami, specializing in used luxury cars like BMWs and Mercedes. He makes around $60,000 a year, which is decent for someone in his late 20s, but he always seemed a bit insecure about it. I think that is part of why he pushed so much. He came from a traditional Cuban-American family, where success and family approval meant everything. His parents, Carlos and Isabel Morales, own a small grocery store in Little Havana, stocking imported goods from Cuba and Latin America, like plantains, yuca, and those strong coffees his mom loves to brew. Jared told me stories about growing up in their house in Coral Gables, a neighborhood with beautiful old Spanish-style homes, tiled roofs, and lush gardens, full of bougainvillea. He described his parents as warm but intense, always involved in his life, expecting him to settle down with someone who fit their cultural mold. I was hesitant at first, not because I did not see a future with him, but because family dynamics can be complicated. I am 28, a senior graphic designer at a mid-sized agency in downtown Chicago. Our office is in a modern building near the Loop with open workspaces, lots of natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows, and a coffee bar where we brainstorm ideas over lattes. I earn about $85,000 a year, which feels comfortable in Chicago, enough to cover my rent in a cozy one-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park, with exposed brick walls and a small balcony where I grow herbs like basil and mint. My job involves creating visual campaigns for clients, like branding for local nonprofits or digital ads for tech startups. I love the creative side, sketching ideas on my tablet late at night, but it can be stressful with tight deadlines. Jared knew I had lost my father when I was 15 to a heart attack that came out of nowhere, but he never asked much beyond that. He is not the type to dig deep into emotional stuff unless it affects him directly. I think part of it was his own pressures. He mentioned how his parents always compared him to his older brother, who became a doctor, and Jared felt like he had to prove himself. So, he assumed my background was straightforward, like my appearance. Blonde hair, blue eyes, last name Larson. But my father, Miguel, was from Cádiz, Spain. He moved to the United States in his 20s, met my mom in Chicago, and they built a life together. Spanish was the language we spoke at home. He would read me bedtime stories from old Spanish folktales, teach me to cook paella on Sundays, and play flamenco music on his guitar in our living room, which had colorful tiles he brought back from trips home. After he died, speaking Spanish felt too painful, like opening an old wound. It reminded me of his laugh, his hugs, the way he called me mi pequeña artista when I drew pictures as a kid. I kept it private, a quiet part of my heart, and Jared never showed curiosity enough to uncover it. Finally, I agreed to the dinner. We flew down to Miami. I paid for the round-trip tickets, about $250 each, since my salary is higher, and I did not mind. It is common in relationships like ours, where one person earns more, to share expenses that way without making a big deal. The flight was short, but I felt a mix of excitement and dread. Excited to see Jared's world, but dreading if I would fit in. We rented a car at the airport, a compact SUV, for about $150 for the weekend, which made sense because Miami traffic is chaotic, and it was cheaper than relying on rideshares. Driving to Coral Gables, I noticed the palm trees lining the streets, the vibrant murals on buildings, and the humid air that smelled like salt and flowers. Jared's parents' house was just as he described. A single-story home with a red-tiled roof, a courtyard fountain, and a garden where Isabel grew orchids and herbs. When we arrived, I felt a knot in my stomach, hoping the evening would go smoothly. We walked into the Morales home, and right away, I felt the warmth of their hospitality mixed with that underlying intensity Jared had mentioned. The living room had terracotta floors, wooden beams on the ceiling, and walls painted in soft earth tones, decorated with family photos and a few pieces of Cuban art. Bright paintings of Havana streets that Isabel had collected over the years. There was a faint smell of garlic and onions from the kitchen, where Isabel was finishing up dinner. She greeted me with a hug that was genuine but quick. Her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple floral dress. Carlos shook my hand firmly. He was a sturdy man with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a button-up shirt, and he had that quiet authority about him, like someone who had worked hard all his life running the family store. We moved to the dining room, a cozy space with a long wooden table set with colorful plates and a centerpiece of fresh flowers from their garden. Dinner was a spread of Cuban dishes, ropa vieja, which is shredded beef in a tomato sauce, black beans and rice, tostones, those fried plantain slices, and a salad with avocados. Isabel explained the recipes came from her mother, passed down through generations, and I complimented her on how delicious it looked, trying to show interest in their culture. Jared smiled at me, but there was something off in his eyes, like he was already performing for his parents. As soon as we sat down, the conversation shifted to Spanish. Jared turned to me and said, "We are just catching up on family stuff, Ava. We will switch to English in a bit, I promise." But they never did. For the next 2 hours, I sat there, nodding and smiling when they glanced my way, passing the salt or refilling water glasses, all while understanding every word. It was rapid-fire Spanish, the kind spoken in Cuban-American homes in Miami, with that rhythmic cadence and occasional slang from the island. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was hurt that they excluded me, but another part was almost relieved to just observe, like I was invisible. It started innocently enough, with small talk about the grocery store, how business was picking up after a slow season, with more tourists coming to Little Havana for authentic Cuban sandwiches. But then Jared steered it toward me. In Spanish, he said, "Ava is doing all right with her graphic design job in Chicago. It is creative work, but nothing too ambitious. She is happy with her routine, you know. I am the one who pushes us to do more exciting things, like our trips. I usually cover most of the costs because her salary is not as high." That was a flat-out lie. My $85,000 a year lets me live comfortably, and I had paid for our last vacation to Key West, about $800 total for the weekend, including a mid-range hotel on Duval Street and meals at seafood spots. It was not extravagant, just a typical getaway for young professionals in the States, where you split costs but sometimes one person covers more if they earn better. Jared made less, around $60,000, and I think he felt insecure about it, especially compared to his brother's success. Maybe that is why he exaggerated, to make himself look like the provider in front of his parents, who valued that traditional role. Then he moved on to my personality. "She is nice, really sweet," he said with a sigh. "But she is so American. No real interest in our culture. She will not even try to learn a few Spanish words. It is like she is content with her burgers and baseball world. Sometimes it feels tiring." Another lie that stung deep. I had just finished a project at work designing bilingual posters for a Hispanic community center in Pilsen, a neighborhood in Chicago full of Mexican and Puerto Rican influences, with murals and taquerias everywhere. I drew inspiration from my father's stories of Cádiz, incorporating flamenco motifs into the graphics. But Jared never asked about my work in detail. He seemed more focused on his own stresses, like meeting sales quotas at the dealership, where he had to charm customers into buying cars they might not need. I think he projected his own frustrations onto me, feeling trapped between his family's expectations and his career. The hardest part came when Isabel asked about our future. "Are you too serious? Thinking about marriage?" Jared laughed, a light sound that hid something bitter. "I want to, Mom, but Ava is the one dragging her feet. She is independent, always avoiding talks about settling down. I have to beg her to plan ahead." In my purse, I had a sketch of a promise ring I was having made, about $500 for a custom silver band with a small sapphire. Nothing flashy, just meaningful, priced reasonably at a local jeweler in Chicago. I was planning to give it to him on his birthday during a surprise trip to Savannah, Georgia, which I had booked for around $1,200, covering a boutique hotel in the historic district and some tours of antebellum homes. It was affordable on my salary, a nice splurge for couples in their 20s. But hearing him twist it made me feel a wave of anger mixed with sadness. Angry at the betrayal, sad that he felt the need to lie, perhaps because his parents had pressured him about finding a good partner. The conversation went on like this, dissecting me while I sat there, forcing a smile. The worst was Jared's casual tone, like he was just venting, but with that underlying resentment. His father asked, "Are you sure about her, son? She seems a bit simple." Jared reached over, patted my hand with fake affection, and said in Spanish, "It is fine. She is too clueless to even know we are talking about her. Look at her smiling like everything is okay." That hit me hard. I felt rage bubbling up, but also a confusing pity for him. Maybe he was acting out of his own insecurities, the pressure to impress his family making him say things he did not fully mean. Still, it hurt, reminding me of how my father always said words have power, especially in the language of home. As dessert was served, a simple flan that Isabel had made, creamy and caramel-topped, I felt the weight of the evening pressing on me. My mind was a whirlwind. Anger at Jared for his lies, sadness for the relationship I thought we had, and a strange resolve building inside. Part of me wanted to scream, but another part, the one my father taught to stay calm in tough moments, knew better. I decided to wait for the right time, not to explode, but to reveal the truth in a way that would speak for itself. That moment came as we were saying goodbyes. Carlos, perhaps sensing the awkwardness or feeling a bit guilty for the one-sided conversation, turned to me and spoke in slow, deliberate English, like he was addressing someone who might not follow. "It was nice to meet you, Ava," he said, patting my shoulder. I looked him in the eye, took a deep breath, and let the words flow in perfect Castilian Spanish, the kind my father spoke with his soft Andalusian accent. "The pleasure has been mine, Mr. Morales," I said, my voice steady and unaccented. "And Mrs. Morales, your cooking was wonderful. Thank you so much for your hospitality this evening." The room went silent, the kind of heavy quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. Isabel's spoon clattered against her plate as she set it down, her eyes wide with surprise. Carlos's face froze, his mouth slightly open, like he could not believe what he had heard. Jared turned a shade paler, his usual confident smile vanishing, replaced by a look of pure shock. He stared at me as if I had transformed into someone else right there. I kept my expression polite, warm even, but inside I felt a mix of triumph and heartache. Triumph that the truth was out, heartache that it had come to this. I was not done. Turning back to his parents, still in Spanish, I said, "Jared, this night has been very eye-opening. There are a few things I would like to clarify while we are all here." The silence stretched, broken only by Isabel's soft gasp. Jared looked like he wanted to interrupt, but he stayed frozen, perhaps realizing too late the hole he had dug. First, I addressed the career talk. "Jared mentioned my job and finances," I said calmly. "I want to assure you I was promoted to senior designer last month at my agency in Chicago. It came with a raise that puts me at about $85,000 a year, which is solid for graphic design work there. As for paying for our trips, here is the confirmation for the Key West weekend I covered, about $800 for the hotel and meals." I pulled out my phone, showing the email receipt, placing it on the table. "And this is the booking for Savannah next month, around $1,200 for the hotel and activities. Just a misunderstanding, I am sure." Carlos nodded slowly, glancing at Jared with a frown that spoke of disappointment. Then the culture part, which hurt the most. "He said I have no interest in your heritage," I continued, my voice softening a bit. "That is not true. My father was from Cadiz, and Spanish was our home language. He taught me through stories and songs. After he passed, it became painful to use, a private memory. I did not share it with Jared because it felt sacred, not because of ignorance." Isabel placed a hand on her chest, her expression shifting to sympathy, perhaps relating as a parent herself. Finally, the commitment. I turned to Jared now, my tone firmer, edged with the pain I felt. "You told them I am afraid of marriage, that I avoid the future. But I have been working with a jeweler on a promise ring for you, about $500 for a custom piece. I plan to give it during the Savannah trip." I let that hang in the air. A relationship cannot be built on seeing someone as clueless, using the language of my father's love to mock them. I stood up, thanked Carlos and Isabel again for their home, that beautiful space full of family history, and walked out to the rental car in the driveway. The night air in Coral Gables was warm, humid, with crickets chirping in the gardens. As I drove away, I felt a rush of emotions, relief at speaking up, sorrow for what was lost, and a quiet pride in honoring my father's memory. The drive back to our hotel in Miami Beach felt endless, even though it was only about 20 minutes. The streets were lit with neon signs from bars and restaurants, people walking along the sidewalks in summer clothes. But I barely noticed. Jared sat in the passenger seat, silent at first, then mumbling something about how I had overreacted. I did not respond. My hands gripped the steering wheel of the rental car, my mind replaying the evening. Part of me felt empowered, like I had finally stood up for myself, but another part ached with confusion. Why had he done that? Was it just insecurity or something deeper? We had booked a room at a mid-range hotel on Ocean Drive, the kind with Art Deco architecture, pastel colors, and views of the beach. It cost about $250 a night, which was average for Miami Beach in the summer of 2025. Not luxurious, but comfortable with a balcony overlooking the Atlantic. I had paid for it, like the flights, because it made sense with my salary. When we got inside the room with its white linens and seashell decor, the tension broke. Jared exploded, pacing the floor. "You knew the whole time," he yelled, his face red. "You sat there and let me talk. You tricked me into humiliating myself in front of my parents." His voice cracked a bit, and I saw a flash of vulnerability, maybe regret, or fear of what his family would think now. I stayed calm, sitting on the edge of the bed, though my heart was pounding. "No, Jared," I said quietly. "I did not do anything. I just existed at that table. You chose your words. You humiliated yourself." He tried to argue, saying he was just trying to impress his parents, make them see him as the strong one in the relationship. "They always think I am not good enough compared to my brother," he admitted, slumping into a chair. It was the first time he had opened up like that about his family pressures, and for a moment, I felt sorry for him. trapped in expectations that made him lie. But then I remembered how he had used my father's language against me, and the pity turned back to resolve. He started apologizing, tears in his eyes, begging me to forgive him. "I did not mean it, Ava. It was stupid. We can fix this." But his excuses felt hollow, like he was more sorry about getting caught than the hurt he caused. I thought about my father, how he always said trust is like a fragile vase. Once broken, it is hard to mend without cracks. "You did not just lie to them," I told him. "You lied about us, about me, and you mocked something sacred. That is not fixable." I felt a tear slip down my cheek, a mix of sadness for what we had lost and relief that it was over. That night, I booked a one-way flight back to Chicago for the next morning, about $150 last minute, which was reasonable given the short notice. Jared could handle his own way home. I slept on the couch in the room, staring at the ceiling fan, feeling lonely but also strangely at peace. The next day, I left without a big scene, just a quiet goodbye. Back in my apartment in Wicker Park, with its familiar clutter of sketchbooks and coffee mugs, I blocked his number and started unpacking the emotional baggage. A few days after I got back to Chicago, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number from Miami. I answered cautiously, and it was Carlos Morales, Jared's father. His voice was heavy, almost hesitant. "Ava, this is Carlos. I am calling to apologize for what happened in our home." I was surprised. I had not expected to hear from them. He went on, saying they were ashamed of Jared's behavior, that they had raised him to be honest and respectful, but clearly something had gone wrong. "We sat there and let him speak that way," Carlos admitted, "and for that, we are sorry. What he did, using your father's language like that, was wrong." Isabel got on the line too, her tone softer, expressing sympathy for my loss and saying they admired how I handled myself. They told me they had a long talk with Jared after I left, confronting him about the lies, and he had broken down, admitting it all. But they were disappointed in him, and as a result, they were stopping their financial help. Things like covering his car payments or sending extra money when he was short. It was not a legal thing. Parents are not obligated to support adult children under Florida law, but it was their way of making him face consequences. I appreciated the call. It made me feel validated, though a small part of me wondered if Jared's upbringing had contributed to his need to lie. Meanwhile, Jared tried to twist the story with our mutual friends in Miami. He texted a few of them, claiming I had hidden my Spanish fluency to trap him, that I was the deceptive one. But the truth spread quickly. The image of me sitting quietly while he insulted me in a language I understood was too compelling. One friend who works at a cafe in Little Havana told me later that people were talking about it in our circle, shaking their heads at Jared's actions. His reputation took a hit. Friends distanced themselves, seeing him as unreliable. I think his insecurity played a role here, too. Perhaps he panicked and tried to save face, but it backfired. As for me, I decided to sell the promise ring I had designed. It was a simple piece, custom-made at a small jewelry shop in Chicago's Loop District, where artisans work in a cozy studio filled with tools and gemstones. I got about $400 back after fees, which was fair for a $500 item in the 2025 market. Not a huge loss, but enough to put towards something positive. I felt a pang of sadness letting it go, like closing a chapter, but also a sense of closure. It has been 6 months since that dinner in Coral Gables, and life has settled into a new rhythm. The initial sting of the breakup has faded, replaced by a steady sense of clarity. I hear bits and pieces about Jared through mutual friends, and it seems like he is struggling. He lost his job at the car dealership. Apparently his performance slipped after the fallout, and with the competitive market in Miami, they let him go. Now he is working odd sales jobs, bouncing between gigs, and living in a small apartment in a less fancy part of town, away from the beaches. His parents are still distant, holding him accountable, which I think is tough love he needed. From what I gather, Jared has moments of reflection, admitting to friends that his insecurities got the best of him, but he also resents how things played out. It is complicated, like real people are, not just a villain, but someone dealing with his own mess. For me, those $400 from selling the ring went toward a trip I had always wanted to take. 2 weeks in Cadiz, Spain, my father's hometown. I kept it simple and budget-friendly, about $1,500 total in the summer of 2025, $700 for a modest hostel in the old town with shared kitchens and views of the Atlantic, and $800 for meals, local buses, and small entry fees to sites. It was not a luxury vacation. I chose affordable options to focus on the experience, like many solo travelers do these days. Cadiz is a charming coastal city with narrow cobblestone streets, whitewashed buildings, and beaches where the waves crash against ancient walls. I walked the places my father described: the cathedral with its golden dome, the market full of fresh seafood and olives, and the neighborhood where he grew up, now dotted with cafes serving tapas. Speaking Spanish there felt natural again, not painful. I chatted with locals about the weather, ordered coffee in small bars with tiled counters, and even joined a casual flamenco class in a community center. It healed something in me, reconnecting with that part of my heritage without the shadow of betrayal. I felt a mix of joy and melancholy. Joy in the freedom. Melancholy missing my father, but overall, grateful. Back in Chicago, I am focusing on work at the agency, where we just landed a big project for a nonprofit, designing apps for community outreach. My apartment in Wicker Park feels more like home now, with new plants on the balcony and sketches on the walls. I am not dating anyone. I am enjoying time with friends, like weekend brunches at local spots in the neighborhood, full of hip cafes and street art. Jared's actions showed me who he was, but they also reminded me of my own strength. He thought he could define me as clueless, but in the end he revealed his own flaws. And I am moving forward, one day at a time.